Now Jesus came to John to be baptized in the Jordan, and after his baptism he went into the wilderness. He was tempted by Satan, he was with the wild beasts, he was ministered to by the angels, and when he heard that John had been arrested, Jesus began to proclaim the good news of the gospel. You know, I haven't always been as smart as I am now. Yeah, there was actually a time in my life when I was ignorant. So ignorant that I thought I knew everything. My sense of self exceeded reality. But I am much smarter and wiser now because I know what I don't know. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I was 17 years old. It was Youth Sunday. I had finished my Youth Sunday sermon. Now, I've been preaching since I was 12 years old, once a month on Sunday evenings at our little church, Northside Drive Baptist Church. And I just finished the Youth Sunday sermon. I was having lunch with our pastor, Dr. Purdy, and he asked, "Have you decided where you're going to college yet?" And still full of myself after that incredible sermon that I'd preached, I said, "Well, you know, we Baptists don't even have to go to college, and I think I'm doing pretty well." He said, "You need to go to college and seminary." And of course I responded, "But Dr. Purdy, Jesus never went to college and seminary." To which he very kindly, gently, and directly responded, "Jim, you're not Jesus." Jesus began his ministry at 30 years of age. That sounds about right. Now, I went to college and seminary and then was an associate minister, mentored by another senior minister for 5 years. And in fact, my first Sunday as a senior minister at First Baptist Church of Baxley, I preached my first sermon there on my birthday. September the 22nd was a Sunday morning. September the 22nd. September the 22nd. And I turned 30 that day. That's about right. In Mark chapter 1, verses 9 to 15, Jesus comes to the Jordan River with 30 years of life behind him. He was baptized there and experienced the presence of God. He was driven into the wilderness and experienced suffering. He heard about then and dealt with his cousin John being arrested and thrown into jail. And it's then that he begins to proclaim the good news of the gospel. I don't think that's an accident. This was the time, this was the moment, this was the chapter in Jesus' life when Jesus began his ministry, because two things had happened, two things that I think are necessary prerequisites for being a proclaimer to the world about the good news of God. One, Jesus had just experienced life for 30 years. In just these verses, you've got the highs and lows of baptism and wilderness. And 30 years before that, he had been a refugee in Egypt. He had assisted in his father's building business. He had interacted with his brothers and sisters. He had endured the death of his father. He had experienced 30 years, a lifetime of being called a bastard in Hebrew. Read the Gospel of Mark closely. Jesus is always referred to as the son of Mary. Now, Judaism IDs you. It names you by who your father is. His name should have been Jesus bar Joseph, Jesus son of Joseph. But throughout the gospel, he is Jesus bar Mary because we don't know who your father is. Jesus had experienced a lot of life, up and down, good and bad. And the second thing was Jesus had observed the life and struggle of others. Now, after John was arrested, it's one thing to deal with our own lives, it's another to empathize and sympathize and care for the lives of others. Now, I hadn't been close to any of this when I was in the 7th grade. I didn't know about any of this in 10th grade or 12th grade or during my college days or even during my early ministry. It took a while to live long enough and love enough to look hard at my own life and look softly at the life of other people, to be able to preach and be able to minister from a true sense of compassion and justice and grace. Now, I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't want to go through half of it again. But when people walk in my office, they know that they are not alone in the process of marriage or divorce or addiction or poverty or parenting or foster care or adoption or vocation or relocation or caring for dying parents and losing parents. You get the picture, right? I wouldn't want to go through half of it again. But I used to think I knew everything. And now I know what I don't know and what I didn't know. I've lived some life and walked with others on their journeys, ups and downs and good and bad. It's what prepares us. It's our prerequisites for being able to speak good news into the life of others. Have you ever met someone and you're just not sure you're going to like them? Our guest preacher this morning is Dr. Scott Porter. I'm smiling. First time I was in a room with Scott and the first time he spoke, I just wasn't sure. He has this charming, direct way of speaking. And I don't mind charming and I don't mind direct. There's just something tricky about mixing them together. And I couldn't figure out why it bothered me so much until I realized that's my shtick. It didn't take me long to know that we as a congregation needed to hear him speak. And so I asked him to come and speak, and he said, "Are you sure?" And on the outside, I said, "Of course." And on the inside, I said, "I'm just kidding." Sort of. Scott is a physician and a surgeon. He is the vice president of equity and inclusivity at Greenville Health Systems. He's a Yale grad and a father and a husband. But what really qualifies him to be here today is because he has experienced life up and down, good and bad, and he has spent a career knowing the struggles and the journeys of other people. And Scott, we welcome you to this pulpit this morning.
So good morning. I think I know some of you out there, many I don't. But before I get started, you can flat out sing. I was sitting here waiting for the amens and the applause. At Second Baptist Church, that would have done something. And so the second thing I want to say early on is a little bit of an apology. So this morning, as I was getting ready, and whenever I speak before a group, I was telling Pastor that I rarely ever have notes. I generally just get the feel for what's going on and then just ad-lib, and I generally enjoy me. Sometimes the audience may not, but so I was in Costa Rica last week at a meeting, and I just flew back in, and in Costa Rica is a great time to gather your thoughts. And so I'm on the beach, I'm thinking about the occasion, I'm thinking about the message, and I think I have my thoughts all lined up, and I'm ready to go. And this morning, as my wife and kids are getting ready to go to church, she asks about this, and she says to me, "You don't have any notes?" I said, "Well, no, I generally, when I go, I don't have notes. If it's a lecture, I'll have a PowerPoint, but no notes." And she says, "All right, Mr. Notes, have a good time." And I thought in my mind, she just doomed me to absolutely bombing without notes. So my apology to you is, I have notes. And so we all have to take these little motions or these little times from the Lord where he speaks to us in small ways, and I think that he was speaking to me through my wife. So I have notes, and hopefully I won't look at them too much because it may throw me off, but nevertheless, we heard today, "You are my son, whom I love, with you I am well pleased." And I always heard and enjoyed one of the reasons for this pulpit, is to prepare us for that judgment. One of the reasons we are here is to challenge one another in a position of discomfort to allow us to be judged. We are all to love the least of us. And oftentimes that love may be a source of this judgment. And so you are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased. And so let us look at how we are approaching diversity. I understand it's Black History Month. I understand this is the month out of the year where we should be reflecting on all of these things. And so I am here to kind of help us to possibly reflect on this. And so with you I am well pleased, and with that we are to love the least of these, out of Matthew 25. And so more specifically, I'm wondering what we have done in our lives as we reflect. More importantly, though, what have we not done? Because either of those scenarios are going to get judged at some point. With you I am well pleased. And so the goal today is to talk about diversity a little bit, but before I do, let me just say that it may be a little bit different coming from me than from most, especially when you hear diversity brought to you by an ethnic or an African American or whatever. And the reason why is I think that many diversity efforts don't work. I don't think they've worked over time. I don't think that they work now. Now, the obvious notable exceptions are some of the milestone landmark cases that we have had in our country. But aside from that, in terms of our communities, I don't think they've worked very well. And it's not a good or a bad, it just is. If you grew up in Second Baptist Church, the congregation would look all like me. If you're in First Baptist Church in Greenville, the congregation looks all like Jim. Is that by chance? I don't think it is. I think that it is something that we all should just talk about. Again, it's not good, it's not bad. It just simply is. And without having the ability to sit and lovingly talk about it, I truly wonder if we've gotten any better. Now, certainly things have gotten better, but is it because of just general attrition? The most racist amongst us at some point have to die. Their kids, we hope, will be a little bit less racist. At some point, they will grow up and die. Their kids will be a little less racist, and on and on and on. And so at some point, society will actually be a little bit better, but should we wait for that passivity? So I think that there are two sub-reasons and one main reason why these efforts don't work. And the main reason I will give you first, and that is, in 2018 in the United States, we are not allowed to have conversations about diversity from a position of love and vulnerability. Think about that and understand that. We are not allowed to have these conversations from a position of love and vulnerability. A friend of mine just 2 weeks ago comes to me and we're talking about this whole thing. And he says to me, he asked one of his coworkers who was a female, and he is a person who has some influence in their unit. And he was asking her about the pay inequity that we hear about in the press between men and women, equal pay for equal work. And his simply asking the question invited a tirade from her about why it is that women deserve equal pay for equal work and why it is they don't now have equal pay for equal work. And my question to him was, well, how did that make you feel as a person who can control this? And his answer was defensive. And so one of the first reasons that I think this does not work, and this is the world according to Scott Porter. I love debate. Stop me afterwards, challenge me. I thoroughly enjoy it. I see one of my debate partners in the audience there, so I thoroughly enjoy it. So invite me, push back. But one of the reasons I think it doesn't work is us, minorities, in quotation marks. Insert whatever you want to put in there. The obvious dominant ones are race, religion, creed, color, but there are sub-ones as well. So LGBT and all of these, insert whatever one you want to put in there. The question I have for all of us, though, is how is it that we are going to expect people to get into meaningful conversation when all we have is a victim mentality? Think about that. So if someone comes and asks a woman about pay inequality, it doesn't generate or invite a loving discourse, because I know the guy, and I know he was asking because he wants to understand that blind spot. When someone goes to an African American and asks about the importance of statues that were made 80 years ago, but only now are asked to be taken down, why is that we cannot accept that conversation in love? When someone asks Hispanics about the duality of their existence between this country and a land that is a homeland, meaning they left it, they understand the cultures, they understand what's going on, help me to explain this duality, you're labeled a bigot or racist. When someone goes to an LGBT member and asks about any number of things, flamboyance or what have you, and they're labeled as homophobic, what does that do to the person who may truly be coming in love? It makes them defensive. And who among us is going to be of an open mind and learning in that state? So I'll pause there and move on to the second point, because I understand we have 12 minutes and the radio is ticking. So the second point is, and this is one that is very, very specific. And if we were in the Second Baptist Church, I may not get some amens on this one. But I got to speak to white folks, and specifically white males. And so what does that mean? So one of the things that I always hear when I have these conversations, because I do invite them, ask whatever, let's have the conversation, is, it was so long ago. Why don't people just get over it? Or, I didn't have any slaves. Why don't we just get over it? Or, I never fought in the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are conversations that happen on a regular basis. These are comments that are made on a regular basis. And so the interesting thing is a couple of things. Number one, where are the young kids? Kids under the age of 12. Raise your hand. Under the age of 12. 14. Under the age of 14, raise your hand. All right, we have enough of them. Do you guys know your great-grandparents? Most of you know your great-grandparents. So here is something to bring it on home. My great-grandfathers, two of them, were born before 1865. Does that mean something to anyone in the audience? So my great-grandfather was born before 1865, two of them. It wasn't that long ago. So another thing, so who in the audience is above the age of 53? Raise your hand. Above the age of 53. So kids, look around. This is you in 40 years, okay? So anyone above the age of 53 lived in this country when African Americans were not allowed to vote. It wasn't that we didn't choose to vote. We legally were not allowed to vote. Anyone above the age of 53. 54, around those same number of people will raise their hand. That was a Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which gave us essentially citizenship, which barred some things, some discrimination, some other terrible atrocities. It was only 54 years ago. Anyone above the age of 64? Awesome. Again, turn around. This is you in 50 years. When you were born, or perhaps even in school, separate but equal was the rule of the land. It wasn't until Brown v. Board of Education that African Americans were allowed to go to school in an integrated fashion. And I would submit to you, in this county, anyone above the age of 50 went to a segregated school, because Greenville County didn't desegregate until the 70s. And so when people say it wasn't that long ago, think about the ages of the individuals that I just talked about. They're managers, directors, CEOs, CFOs, and somehow we think that the most impressionable time of lives by many psychiatrists and psychologists before the age or before the grade of 4, the most impressionable times of many of our lives was spent with legalized segregation, legalized prohibition from voting, legalized separate but equal, but it was a long time ago. So I would submit that there is an indelible imprint in the psyche of these individuals that cannot be overcome by just simply passively living. There needs to be some activity in order to help that to happen. Some of that activity is actually brought to us, right? How many people will have a son or a daughter that will marry outside of their race? The first grandkid that comes along, and I promise you, your eyes are open. I married a blonde Alaskan. My mom couldn't stand it until the first granddaughter. So how many people are forced into that situation? And it's awesome. How many people have kids that adopt someone from a different country? Those things, unfortunately, aren't the majority, and they're still leaving a lot of passivity. What I would say is, without effort, without a loving effort, without a vulnerable effort, without the ability to say to someone somewhere, let's talk about this, the privileges that result from those types of upbringings will remain in our subpsyche. They may not be something that we know and we recognize and we walk around every single day thinking, I'm privileged, how are you, I'm privileged. That's not what happens, but there certainly is a subconscious that is created by the stories of our lives. And the story of America wasn't that long, or isn't that long. So what I would say is, these two states of being, between the victimization of the minority state, the subconscious or overtly conscious privilege of the non-minority, creates an impasse. Can we get over this impasse? I don't think we get over the impasse by forcing people into diversity training. I don't think we get over the impasse by forcing people to have Black History Month celebrations. I don't think we get over the impasse by doing any of those things. I think we get over the impasse by having privilege that are open and curious enough to have their privilege challenged, and minorities that are vulnerable and loving enough to challenge them. That's the way I think it works. And so I ask again, you are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased. With you I am well pleased. Our acts are going to be judged. Are we happy with them?